In December of 1973, a club was formed in New York City in the lower Manhattan area. Its name was Country Bluegrass and Blues, but most people know it for its acronym, CBGBs. There was only one way for people to be allowed to play music in this club, according to its owner, Hilly Crystal, which was if they did their own music. Due to this musical mindset of doing it yourself, CBGBs went on to become one of the most essential places for the musical revolution that would take place in the mid-70s, the arrival of punk rock. But before punk was even a thing, the bands who ended up influencing it started regularly playing at this club. Television was the first of this pack of new bands, and it was formed in the same year of 1973. In 1974, they managed to convince Hilly Crystal to let them become a regular band at CBGB's, even though, funny enough, he said he did not enjoy their music in the Punk Attitude documentary, which I'll link in the description below. And so, for a couple of years, this group was able to influence not only the people who would come to watch their shows at CBGB's, but also the bands who would form and start playing with them at this club and others, being now considered one of the founding fathers of punk, much to the dismay of their frontman and lead singer, who despised said label. However, their debut record came out much later than their contemporaries' debut records, in 1977. And in spite of it being one of the best albums of the decade, and of this band garnering a sort of cult following, which has been kept alive with the passage of time, they were never able to reach the level of success that other CBGB bands reached. So join me as we discuss the fascinating story of this great band, and find out how television set itself apart from other groups. In the mid-60s, many years before the formation of television, Tom Miller met Richard Myers while they were frequenting the same high school in the town of Wilmington, Delaware. They became friends, and when Myers moved to New York in 1967, Miller would soon join him, around 18 months later, after finishing high school. It was in New York that they changed their names to the ones that they would be known for the rest of their lives. Miller became Tom Verlaine, and Myers became Richard Hell. But they didn't move to New York to become musicians, but to become writers. Quoting Richard Hell in an interview with The New Yorker, "In my early years in New York, starting in the late 60s, I was doing a poetry magazine called Genesis Grasp, and I had a small press. Me and Verlaine collaborated on the Theresa Stern book, and I had 3 other books planned that I had the manuscripts for. One by Verlaine, one by Patti Smith, and one by me. But I was getting frustrated with the whole life because the rewards were few, and I wanted to have more of an impact. And then the New York Dolls happened, and that was really inspiring to see." Verlaine had been playing guitar for years, ever since he was a teenager, and soon after being blown away by the New York Dolls, Hell bought a bass guitar and simultaneously quit poetry, since he didn't want to be known as a rock poet, but as a more visceral character. Soon after Hell started playing bass, him, Verlaine, and drummer Billy Ficca, a childhood friend of both of them who had also moved to New York, formed Neon Boys. The Neon Boys were very short-lived, because a year after their formation, a young New York native returned to his home after a period of time trying to pursue music in LA, and became enthralled by Verlaine and Hell, after being introduced to them by Terry York, who was the manager of a movie memorabilia store where Hell was working. His name was Richard Lloyd, and due to his technical prowess, he joined the group, which renamed itself from Neon Boys to Television. Now that the group had been formed, it was time for them to perform live. After securing quotes from former Stooges manager Danny Fields and the director for the film Rebel Without a Cause, Nicholas Ray, even though only the latter one saw them rehearse, they placed an ad on the Village Voice and finally got a gig. Here's Richard Lloyd's description of how it went. We took out a little ad in the Village Voice newspaper, and on the night we were surprised. 88 seats, and we filled most of them. And, well, we were like the Sex Pistols that couldn't play. We were all over the map, especially in singing. When Tom would want a 3-part harmony, neither he nor Hell could hold a goddamn pitch. I'm no Frank Sinatra, but I can sing in pitch. We got into these huge arguments about who was off. The group would eventually only find a place to play if they rented such place, which was far from optimal. So according to Lloyd, they started looking for a place where they could play night in and night out and really hone their skills performing live. And eventually, Verlaine found such place, CBGB's. The band members and Terry York were able to persuade Hilly Crystal, and so Television began playing gigs on CBGBs on a regular basis. Quoting Richard Hell, there was a lot of gratification in having a rock and roll band, but for 3 or 4 years, there was no money in it. When we played as Television at CBGBs, a big month would be if we made $50, divided among the band. Other bands in the area started hearing about Television and CBGBs, and they started auditioning for their shot. According to Richard Lloyd, bands would come in on audition nights for their shot, and Terry would ask me what I thought. Talking Heads, the Ramones, Blondie. That's how they started playing at CBGBs, because we needed more bands than just Television, for Christ's sake. Tom came up with this idea, based on double features at the movies. 2 bands each night. Never more, never less. Each would play 2 sets. So, on one night, you'd have Talking Heads, then Television, then Talking Heads, then Television. After a while, labels started showing interest, and Island offered them the opportunity to record a demo with Brian Eno of Roxy Music fame handling the production. Hell got incredibly upset because only 1 or 2 of his songs got chosen for the demo. In contrast, Verlaine had 3 or 4. That, coupled with Verlaine's increasing discontent with Hell's antics during the gigs and with his lack of technical ability, which was showcased in the recorded demo, ended with him exiting the group. With Hell's departure and Fred Smith from Blondie joining the group, the chaotic nature of the group's sound, mainly in the live performances, diminished, and the possibility for the band to become more technically complex emerged. It took a while for the group to sign to a label, with them only signing to Elektra Records in August of 1976. In the meantime, their output consisted of the single Little Johnny Jewel, self-released by Terry York in the previous year. In the meantime, several groups, both American and British, like the Ramones, Patti Smith, and The Clash, just to name a few, had leapfrogged them, releasing their debut records. But the wait would be worthwhile, because in early 1977, Television would finally release their debut record, Marquee Moon. By this point, people knew Television as one of the godfathers of the punk scene that had exploded in the previous year. However, Television didn't sound or look anything like punk bands did at that point, and they, quite frankly, didn't like this term, like many other artists at that time didn't as well. Marquee Moon did nothing but accentuate the enormous differences that existed between them and bands like the Ramones or the Pistols, for example. Little to no distortion, and a colorful vibe permeated the record from front to back, with the title track, a sonic escapade of over 10 minutes long, being the embodiment of this. Marquee Moon is an all-time classic, and one of the best albums of the 1970s. In spite of being critically acclaimed, in both the US and the UK, it only performed well in the latter. One of the things that helped make the performances on the record so great was the fact that almost all of the songs in said record were a few years old and had been played live hundreds of times by this point. So the band were as tight as could be when it came to performing them. As a matter of fact, According to Richard Lloyd, they had a whole batch of songs other than the ones used for Marquee Moon that could have been part of another record. When it came time to record the group's second full-length, Adventure, Lloyd, Smith, and Ficke tried to push for these songs to become part of the record, but Verlaine refused. Instead, he preferred to try and create songs on the spot in the studio. This ended up being the straw that broke the camel's back. Quoting Richard Lloyd, "To me, it was always a losing prospect when we didn't rehearse for the album at all. We got into the studio and it was just Tom's world. We would talk about these other songs that we had left that we could record, and Tom would just say, no. To me, that was the end of television as I know it. The album came out in April 1978. Within 3 months, the band had split up. Adventure, in spite of also being a great record, again failed to chart in the US. In the early 90s, television got back together, signing with Capitol Records for a third full-length. Coming out in September of 1992, Television was a good record, which was again well received by the critics, although not as much as their first couple of records were. Lloyd, although enjoying the record, was not as keen on it as he was on Marquee Moon, for example, describing the record as Television Light due to its more laid-back sound. Television would play sporadically for the next couple of decades, always conceiving new tracks that would eventually not be released on any album due to Verlaine rejecting them. Eventually, Richard Lloyd left the group in 2007, being replaced by Jimmy Rip, a collaborator on most of Verlaine's solo recordings and tours since 1981. Television would continue to tour from time to time, but ended up never releasing any full-length record ever again. On January 28, 2023, Tom Verlaine passed away at the age of 73, putting an end to one of the most quietly great bands of all time. In spite of rarely being discussed on the music press due to Verlaine's reclusive personality, with him literally stating in the past that he wanted his own image and story to disappear from his music, Television is nowadays a name synonymous to rock greatness. David Bowie once claimed Television was the most original band I've seen in New York. They've got it. While U2's The Edge claimed Tom Verlaine was such a huge influence on us as a young band. We never heard the guitar played in that way before. We'd never heard it sound so unique and different. Other musicians like Michael Stipe, Stephen Morris, and John Frusciante have also sung Television's praises. And at the center of it all is Marquee Moon, one of the most important and defining moments in the history of rock and roll. Quoting Richard Lloyd, "There is always Marquee Moon. I don't think of that album as just a collection of songs. I think of Marquee Moon as one thing. It contains so many songs that reach you, but there's no way to separate them. You know, these days people download a song or two from an album. Well, Marquee Moon is not for that. Marquee Moon is the whole thing. One thing. Like Mount Everest." And that's the video. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Joe Fiki, and I'll see you later on another video. Bye bye.